So we're gonna actually start at the beginning, and then we're gonna get to the fun part. So the first part is a bit of a story to tell around their re-entry to the LCS. My understanding, and there was like inklings of this conversation, but never really like a fully like thought out explanation publicly, and they weren't going to cop to this. So they didn't pay to join the LCS, which everyone knows. I think it was like Jacob Wolfers. Someone mentioned offhandedly on Twitter somewhere, like, "Oh, it was just
clear,
us."
guys. This was an equity swap. So MSG, the situation is this: Madison Square Garden, they buy CLG. They're hemorrhaging money. They're spending millions and millions of dollars. They're like, "Please will somebody not make the bleeding stop?" NRG says, "We'll take all your contracts that you've signed to keep running the team, and you will get an equity stake in NRG. Hooray for you!" And they're like, "Okay, so no dollars are exchanged. MSG becomes a partial owner of NRG, presumably has a board seat as well. I don't know that for sure, but if I was they do. Yeah, if I was MSG, I would insist on that.
People even implied there might actually be in cash the opposite direction, like a small amount from CLG or something.
This equity swap was actually step 2 of a 3-step process. The first step of the process failed. First step of the process, my understanding was energy was done. They were trying to sell. They were trying to exit outright. You saw them sell bits and pieces out.
You mean MSG?
Like, no.
NRG was okay.
NRG
was done with what?
Existing.
Okay.
I would assume primarily esport, but it might have included the content branch.
Okay.
That's unclear. My understanding is they were looking for their exit. They were trying to sell effectively outright to the tune of estimates were like 15, 20 million, right? This was pre-LCS. This was like pre-re-entry to the LCS.
For the entire org, 15, 20 million.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, right? Okay. Now, again,
it might have, if people don't know, I'm just thinking of all those Forbes pieces like 4 years ago, like $200 million valuation. I tell you what, I'll take 15 million porn star style and get the fuck out. Like,
so it may have been, again, this is where it's a little shaky. It may have been that they were only going to sell the esports division for that amount. And like the content-y, like
maybe the streamers and the benchy fishes in the world stay
and be a thing, that kind of thing. My understanding of those, they were looking for that exit from at least esports, if not the brand entirely. Couldn't find it, or at least couldn't find it at the valuations they were looking for. 15 might not have been what they wanted. That might have been their best offer.
Right.
Now, to be clear, they couldn't find it. They actually couldn't find a through line on this across the board. They looked for it, couldn't find it, and they said, "Okay, cool. What do we do to pump our valuation so that like we're actually worth money so that we can actually sell?" Because like we just can't exit. Like we don't even have the option. And somebody was like, "Well, I know there's like LCS spots and they're like worth money. We used to be in there, and like obviously people are buying and selling. Like at this point, FlyQuest had the new owners come in, spent a bunch of money doing it. Shopify had come in with TSM, that kind of stuff. Similar. These are all similar windows of conversations." And they said, "Okay, here, look, huge brain idea. If we're going to dump the entire company anyways, let's just dump a bunch of the equity, who cares, for this, to give it to MSG, right? They want a board seat, again, who cares? It's a company that's not going to exist at the other end. Let's just go acquire an LCS slot, that pumps the valuation, and then surely if people are buying LCS slots, they'll buy NRG that has an LCS slot."
The LCS slot really presented as like fucking doing up the attic into a different room before flipping your house or something. For like, I love the idea that's LCS.
Yeah, it's house flipping, but LCS. And here's the insane part. My understanding is like they obviously couldn't tell that to Riot. They can be like, "Hey, yeah, we really want the LCS. We're really just coming in to leave, but like we really want in the LCS." So there's like clearly some obfuscation that was done through the process of like, well, why do you want to be here? What are you doing? What's your intention? Why are you acquiring CLG? Why are you retiring the CLG brand of all brands in esports?
Just to be clear,
in favor of this like weird merger equity thing.
The premise you're implying is obviously Riot doesn't want you buying in, but really just to instantly sell to some other third party immediately.
Of course.
Right? They want you to be their real partner going forward.
The genius is they sold to Riot.
And the question is, it's like, did MSG know?
Right.
Did like the CLG, did the board know? Like, did Riot know? Like, there's so many people you have to ask questions around. And that's ignoring the fact that if you're coming in on the immediate, you know what you're doing is you're, one, acquiring a bunch of LCS contracts, or two, you're signing a bunch of new LCS contracts with staff, with players across the board, with the like potentially theoretical intention on the back end to just sell everything anyways and be in that weird limbo space where all these people lose their jobs.
It's actually more interesting than most of the bloody games. It's like Succession, but about like esports.
This is actually great. I love it.
This should be like a TV show. Yeah, keep going.
This isn't even the most dramatic thing with respect to energy today. I'll drop the actual news now, which is You're definitely familiar, Monty, and Thorin, Richard, you might be familiar. This is just like a very active part of being in the league, being in the LCS. The TPA has basically these like installation, these like guardrails and rules to make sure that there's not abuse, like what happened with Echo Fox and Immortals, or Tosh Gaming in the past, which is if you leave the league, you effectively have to sever your contracts with the players. They don't want you to be able to like hold a LCS player after you're no longer an LCS organization.
Yeah, in jail, like waiting for a buyout. Yeah.
Yes, which is what teams have done in the past.
Yep.
So there's like a built-in rule that says if your TPA is terminated, you must terminate all of your contracts with your players. This is meant to protect the players from being jailed away from the LCS, not to be used as a bludgeoning tool by teams on the way out of the league. NRG, the millisecond it was decided that they were going to be one of the teams gone, picked up the stick and started swinging.
Right.
And tried to terminate all of their players and staff using this TPA rule. Hey, Riot said that we're not in the league anymore, so now we can terminate you. And it is an immediate for cause effect termination. Effectively,
someone get the Photoshop, fire it up, do Andy Miller as a Terminator.
So here's the thing.
Yes, contract.
The only reason to do this is if you are like egregiously cash strapped, don't care about your brand, any of your public image anymore, because what you're doing is you're exiting, you're terminating contracts, you're not paying anyone out, no severance whatsoever. Basically, you're using Riot's TPA guardrail as, again, the bludgeoning stick to save yourself. Not even a lot of money, probably a pittance of money in the grand scheme of what's happened.
And this is, by the way, the buyouts that Riot put on the table this time were more. So it was 6 million in the last round when teams got out. It was 8 to 10 million this time. So it's not like, to Danon's point, it's not like they didn't have an incoming massive amount of money to actually like give somebody a soft landing.
Now here's the thing.
It's why I think I get why the LCS was such a fucked up environment. Like, as he says, it's not even like they did it and in doing so saved loads of money. It was like it made loads of sense. Everyone in the LCS American ecosystem esports is like some demon leprechaun that because they caught you on some loophole in their bargains. Like,
we're not even to the dramatic part yet. We're not into the dramatic part yet. So I want to add some quick notes to this. One, this actually probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. The amount you would pay in severance typically would not be very much because most contracts in the last 2-3 years, especially, which is how long NRG's been around, have been signed and very organization favored because salaries have gone down. Players have been more willing to give up on guarantees, right? So the actual cost of exiting contracts for the most part is like almost nothing. It's a fraction of what operating for a year is. But NRG made a really interesting decision recently. They won an LCS championship and made the weirdest decision you've ever heard or seen anyone make, which is they fired their general manager. Now, to be clear, the general manager came from CLG, so obviously they didn't have necessarily a little loyalty to this person, but obviously this person had built a very successful machine and had won the LCS for what is probably the cheapest team in the history of the league, right?
Yes.
Those were good contracts made by someone who obviously knew what they were doing, and they won a championship because of it. They fired the general manager, chucked him out a window, didn't really entirely backfill the position. They like pseudo promoted one of the coaches to be the new manager type person.
They also fired most of their coaching staff. That got
here's where it gets funny. Because they did this, they didn't actually have someone helming it such that they could make good decisions moving forward. My understanding is they signed a bunch of not fantastic contracts to retain the championship talent. They didn't keep the championship GM who got them good contracts. They kept the championship talent, signed them to new bad deals that have awful termination language and are actually incredibly expensive to exit relative to what they were before. Immediately before they exit, and now we're in a weird position where they need to either pay out or try to use the TPA. Now we'll get to the actual dramatic part. So now we've set the stage of they're out of the league. They don't want to pay the severance because it's a ton of money suddenly that they weren't anticipating. And it's fine. They're free. Riot gave them their out. They're getting their $10 million, whatever, and they can just leave and use the TPA rule. False, because guess what hasn't happened yet? Or at least as my understanding as of like yesterday or the day before.
I mean, they haven't actually been signed the deal, right?
Riot hasn't actually terminated the TPA. They haven't actually been formally legally removed from the LCS, but NRG did formally legally hand out these effectively forced pseudo-mutual terminations saying we don't owe you any money. Also, you don't work here anymore. Also, we've cut off your salary, your payment, everything, right? So they're now no longer paying these people effectively at this moment the money that they probably should be owed, and they're trying to use a rule that's not actually in effect right now to like a dodge paying this severance. Now, again, this is like a couple days old now, so there's obviously some wiggle room for like they came back and just started paying them or whatever. My understanding is that they were trying to hold to this line, and it escalated such that the PA is now handling everything.
Oh,
like this is like straight up like a PA issue. The players are working directly with, I would assume, Phil and the board of the PA, and they are like in direct contact across the board with NRG, the LCS, and everything that's going on to navigate the chaos that is NRG saying, well, we just don't feel like we owe them this money anymore.
Wild.
Yeah.
By the way, the worst part about that is, as you went to pains to point out, the stupid thing is the actual costs mean they could have had more success in the game and kept the original lineup, and instead they've just like cut off their own nose to spite their face and then lost. So they've lost in the game and financially, which is, and the reason why that's so egregious as well, Dana, like you say, is if anyone looked at that roster even on paper and thought these aren't big names, the fucking team won because of the coaching staff, you idiots. Like that's what everyone in the industry said is, wow, look what this coaching staff has done and the positional coaches and this guy. Instead, they were like, it's just the players, bro. Keep the players. Like, and then even worse, sign them to worse deals. That's so dumb. That is so bad, mate.
Yeah, so they specifically fired the general manager, like 2 of the coaches, and then upsized a handful of the contracts and presumably gave themselves not the greatest exit.
And remember, one of those coaches was DeMonte, who went to Flyco and just won this championship now a year later. So, yeah. Good one, guys. Good one.
I mean, I think from the NRG standpoint too, like their exit is obviously going to get messy, and you'd think that, you know, from the situation you might see lawsuits resulting, right? But when we go back and talk about, you know, their goals, Dana, which is like to pump the valuation of the org, you know, what actually happens is they come in, okay, so they cut costs, and as we said earlier, the stipend has increased, so I would imagine NRG was still running comfortably profitably. Then Riot comes and they say, guess what, guys? It's new team participation agreement time. Here's the new stipend. And everybody's like, oh, shit. Like, it's a lot less
money. The bigger
money.
news, hey, the new TPA you can't sell. Obviously, that has to be the death knell to everything they were planning, because if you come in, you're like, okay, even if we have to ride this for a few years, we've got the stipend to cover the difference. Our esports division is no longer plummeting. Maybe they even get a biz dev team going and start building it up. And the second they're stable, surely somebody wants to buy an LCS slot. My understanding is in the immediate, nobody wanted to buy an LCS slot because a handful had just turned over first. And then second, Riot had started floating this like, why don't we just go to VCT and then you can't sell slots anymore? So then suddenly absolutely nobody wants to go buy the NRG LCS, or nobody wants to buy NRG proper because nobody wants to buy NRG the LCS slot for a slot that you can no longer sell anymore. Like maybe you could buy it for, I think the cheapest we heard was like 10 or 15 with like the Shopify FlyQuest deals. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to go buy a slot for 10 or 15 that Riot's going to buy you out of at now we're hearing 6 to 10?
I think the FlyQuest deal was like 20 and Shopify was like 12 million, I think.
Yeah.
Those are rough numbers, guys, I recall off the top of my head. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because if you guys don't know, in Valorant, the model is that you're a partner, but you can't actually sell that slot. You know, hence why like EG couldn't sell to FlyQuest, even though they like FlyQuest was like trying to buy it. Right? It was like, you can't sell the slots. These are we are the kings, and these are our nobles that we have knighted, right? And you can't sell your rank, basically.
I mean, put it this way, like the thing that I despise
is the only level, Monty, that philosophically you could get to Riot. They think of themselves as a monarch, so obviously to actually get any power, you have to recapitulate the Magna Carta, and
course.
just you can be a nobleman who shares a tiny bit of power.
Yes.
And that's I see philosophically where you go.
And they can strip you of your title, you know.
The thing that I despise about that is like, and I don't know enough about the law in America, but it seems to me to be a ridiculous system that I can sell you a franchise slot, right? So it's an asset that you buy into, but also down the road I can change the agreement to be you can't sell. Like, or if you do sell, we have final say.
But so the original contract said that this year they were renegotiating the contract, so the terms can change now.
Well, and there's also I can draw like a more clear line for you specifically on this one, Richard. So the original structure to the league was not Riot gives a bunch of money to teams every year to operate. The original structure was the stipend minimum guarantee was actually very low.
Okay.
And then eventually the revenue is going to come through, so the MG doesn't matter. We're never going to like worry or think about it. It's not going to be a thing. Riot screws up the BAMTech deal. Riot screws up the other sales deals. Riot has FTX happen, and the owners say, "Hey, this isn't our fault. You screwed this up." Riot goes, "Yeah, you're probably right. Let's raise the MG to account for this. We should be having more revenue. We should have money coming through. You should be making money off the league. So here, we'll just raise this up." And Riot's basically just financing the league as an apology to screwing up the deals.
Yep.
And then over time, that just like sits and sits and sits and sits, and it never gets reconciled anywhere, which is whatever until you say, okay, we want to enter a new world. And the teams are like, no, we want to stay here. That MG is not guaranteed to stay that high. It was an apology. Eventually, the apology runs out. Riot has the unilateral right to just change that MG at certain periods. In this case, now, as Monty's saying. So Riot has the ability to just go, okay, old MG, like it's the old one. You're supposed to get your money from revenue, so we're going to go back to the revenue model. MG is now $500,000, whatever we want it to be. So you no longer can operate a team using exclusively Riot's stipend. So the threat is, oh yeah, you don't have to sign the new TPA. You don't have to move to the new one. You don't have to let us buy you out. But if you don't, we're only paying you $500,000 a year, and our rules stipulate operating a team costs $1.5 million. So we're forcibly making it so you're losing $1 million no matter what.
And to NRG's point, like when they're coming in and they like kind of accidentally win LCS, let's be real, they didn't expect to, show up and win in their first.
No, it was just a good decision making by CLG, a good GM. To be clear, everyone likes to tout the coach thing. They only lost one coach. Like, just to be super clear, they got rid of two and they added another one back immediately. They just wanted to make a swap. The biggest change, and I'm going to swing this to the top of the mountain. Obviously, everyone knows it's one of my mentees, John, the Kamikaze Platypus, the GM there's the actual significant change they made.
And he does have a very good reputation.
He has an amazing pedigree, and he went from LCS champion to unemployed in real time as CLG then just completely, or well, I guess NRG catastrophized over the course of a year and has now exited the league.
Right. And I think your points about their goals, make a lot of sense. And whether MSG knew or not, I mean, what we can say about MSG definitively is that they wanted out of esports, because it's not just that they sold the LCS slot. They got rid of their, women's Counter-Strike team. They got rid of their Smash players. They got rid of everything. Right.
They released the financials, didn't they? Where they showed like all of the other entities in their portfolio, and they were all like profitable and making money. And then it got to the esports division, and
to be clear, it was very ham-fisted too. Like CLG Red, like looks like a cool story on the other side of it because it worked out. They weren't like great about trying. They weren't trying to rehome anyone across the board. The LCS people landed on their feet only because Riot mandates you have to have people in seats to do the job. So NRG like effectively begrudgingly accepted those contracts. And every single other feasible person that could be released across the entirety of CLG was released across the board, including all of these different CLG pieces and entities like CLG Red that just luckily got scooped up by like FlyQuest, for example. And again, that was not like a well-intentioned, we sold them because it's a better home. Right. It was, we're dropping all this out a window. Nobody's going to land on their feet. Oh, crap. Like, I guess at least FlyQuest is going to try to help.
Right. And I made this point on Summoning Insight, but it's like you can do some theoretical math about, what this was, because you have to understand like how much equity in NRG is MSG really getting, right? Because it's sure they're getting, NRG is getting an asset that's worth money, but the run rate and the costs of acquiring that asset and continuing to hold it are significant. You know what I mean? Yes. So it's like, I said on SI, like, let's just say they gave 20% to the company, which is probably very high. If we're being honest, that's probably a high number, but we're gonna give like the most I would say cynical take on this, and you'll see why this was probably a very good deal. Now, if we think about the valuation of NRG, okay, you said like they were trying to sell their esports division for $15 or $20 million,
or that was their best offer. It's one of those two.
Sure, or that was their best offer. So let's do some pretend math here. Let's say that we give them a very generous valuation of 8x revenue, which is what you would typically give a tech company and not like a fucking media company, which they actually are, right? With their Fortnite Energy Castle, what Minecraft dudes and Full Squad Gaming and everything else that they own. Now, if we're saying, okay, they sold 20% of their company, and let's just say it wasn't $10 million that Riot offered them to get the fuck out, it was $8 million, okay? So they would have to, let's just pretend like they're making, you know, if they have a $40 million valuation, so $8 million is 20% of that, which is, you know, they would have to be making $5 million in revenue a year. I do not think NRG, especially their esports side, is making $5 million in revenue a year. I don't think that they're making that. Mm-hmm. So in essence, what they did was they did the equity swap, right? And then Riot comes along with the bag, and that bag is $8 million. And what they essentially have done is, I don't think they lost money this last year because, again, Riot increased the stipend, right? Which that MSG would not have known was going to happen probably when they gave the equity swap to NRG. So what they basically did is they sold whatever percentage of their company at probably above the value of their valuation for $8 million. So what they did was they actually just in essence, they created a fundraising round that was more money than they would have gotten for selling that equity in the first place. So it's pretty fucking smart actually of NRG to do this. And now they can use that money to do things that will actually make them money, like their influencer / you know, streamer business. And now they have a massive injection of capital, and probably MSG. And the question is, did MSG sign off on this? Why wouldn't they have signed off on this? They wanted out of esports. If you're on the board and you're like, wait, we can get more money than this equity is worth, and we don't have to have the costs of running this, and we get the fuck out.
I'm amazed how many
Sign us up.
people in esports can't understand the concept that it's positive if you're losing $1 million a year to just not lose $1 million a year in the future. They're like, no, but how do I make money off that? It's like, no, it's by not losing the money, you keep the money. You say that's like, it's like, you get what I'm saying here? They're like, no, but how do they do that though? Like, they weren't making money. It's like, yeah, but what the point is, let's take it all the way back to the beginning. The point is the LCS model doesn't work. Therefore, everyone has realized high, low, or medium, it doesn't work. In fact, I'll even throw this out there. This is also why the LCS walkout was so poorly framed in terms of the overall issue, because it was framed as, look at these dickhead small orgs that are trying to min-max, which we've just said is the only logical thing you should do in the league. And instead we've gone, they're not spending all the money like on a pointless NACL team and paying everyone 100K to play there. And I remember thinking, like, guys, what are you actually arguing for here? Like, this is what you're arguing for will never happen. And even worse, you're actually arguing against the only thing that currently allows people to survive. So I think the whole thing's just so weird in that sense, because for some reason, people still have like a mentality that if you leave in the LCS, you think you're going to like win financially. But actually, as you're saying, Moxie, this is a rare case where someone did. Someone actually sort of found the right idiot to play them out.
These are going to be the only, these are probably the only two that win.
Very logically, yeah.
Let me simplify this enough for you guys. So basically, it's just a math problem. It's we gave up whatever percentage of equity to MSG. Do we want to continue? Do we think that the asset is going to increase in value? The answer is no. By the way, the LCS asset is not going to increase in value, especially if like Danon says, they can't sell the asset anymore, right? So if that is true, then the question is this: what is the valuation of your company based on the revenue? Okay, whatever that valuation is, then it's the percentage that MSG owns. If that number is less than $8 to $10 million, you make money. And also, it's just good because
it almost certainly is. It almost certainly is less than that one.
It almost certainly is. Like I think you would have to be very generous. And even then, like, you know, MSG already owns this percentage of your company, so you can't fix that problem. So it's like, okay, well, now we have just a bunch of money to use on whatever we want to make our business grow in ways that we think is actually going to be better in the long run. And honestly, guys, if you don't know, NRG, as we've been pointing out, they have a pretty sizable influencer business, and they have this other business called Full Squad Gaming, which is like a TikTok channel that does a gazillion views, by the way. So I think that what they are considering is that the real play here, now that they are no longer in Overwatch League with the San Francisco Shock, now that they're no longer in LCS with NRG, they can actually just cut ties with esports and use all this money to develop their influencer channels, which are probably doing a lot better if we're being honest, financially.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.